right, so this video we'll be looking at what is a favela. Uh, Never even really heard the term outside of seeing the map on it. I feel stupid for even saying this on COD, the map favela. But the song that I reacted to, favellas, was talked about in it, and I was like, what exactly is that? So we're gonna take a look right now at what is a favela. This is an animation. Like I said off that video, I want to know more about Brazil because, as I said, people in the comments section talking about the fact that there were more slaves brought to Portugal during the slave trade than anywhere else, thanks to the Portuguese. And I didn't realize that. I, Even looking at the fact that they were one of the biggest slave importers, putting the two and two together, with Brazil being a Portuguese colony at one point, I just never put that 2 plus 2 equaling 4 together. So I want to know more about the history and culture of Brazil as a whole. And this is something that immediately popped in my head, like, what is that? So we're going to rectify that right now. So let's get into it, shall we?
Welcome to Rio de Janeiro, the marvelous city, with its infectious energy, warm people, and stunning landscapes. It's home to Christ the Redeemer, Sugarloaf Mountain, Copacabana Beach, the Lapa Arches, and of course, renowned celebrations like Carnival and New Year's, as well as its favelas, an important but much less celebrated part of Rio de Janeiro. So how do we define favelas? How did they originate?
Bro, that was cool watching them take and draw that. So I'm seeing the cross on top, and that's one of the most iconic. Any photos you see from landscape or any associated with anywhere, the cross on top of it, it looks like looks like a mountain from as tall as it is, or be a very large hill. But the fact that you eyes are immediately drawn to that.
Between 1532 and 1888, Brazil imported 5 million enslaved Africans, more than any country in world history. Rio de Janeiro received close to 2 million slaves. Brazil became the last country in the Americas to abolish slavery in 1888.
Oh wow! What it went for that long there? That's 20 years past what the U.S. did, and that's Jesus. So again, more stuff I didn't know.
The government, whose representatives made their riches off slavery, wasn't concerned with supporting former slaves. Afro-Brazilians were left to fend for themselves, searching for work and living in informal settlements. The first informal settlement to be called favela was formed when soldiers who had served in the bloody Canudos War in Brazil's northeast traveled to Rio de Janeiro, where they were promised land as payment for serving in battle. When they discovered no such land upon arrival, they staged protests and squatted in front of the Ministry of War. They were subsequently relegated to a nearby hillside, which they named Morro da Favela, or Favela Hill, after a robust, resilient, and spiny bush native to the Canudos landscape. Afro-Brazilians and the rural poor were locked out of the nation's extremely unequal land system, and many migrated to cities in search of a better life. They joined the residents on Favela Hill and also settled elsewhere, forming new favelas.
Favelas begin after being lied to by the government, which happens to soldiers all the time, and them squatting in protest over it and naming it after. Okay, might take and look up that little war that she spoke about, but it's an interesting way for something to come about.
Also settled elsewhere, forming new favelas. Favela Hill, which later became known as Providencia, still exists today, overlooking the very port where many residents' ancestors arrived as enslaved African laborers. What started as squatting on one hillside quickly spread across the city. Vacant land was seen as potential territory for homeless families. Today, favelas are home to 23% of Rio's population, about 1.4 million people. If you were to add up the number of people living in favelas across Brazil, it would be the 5th most populous state and would generate the GDP of Bolivia. 65% of residents are middle class. The word favela does not have a direct translation into English and is often mistakenly replaced with the word slum, which makes it easy to associate favelas only with stigmatizing stereotypes of poverty, squalor, drugs, and violence. Rather, the only thing every favela has in common is that they are not subjected to central regulation or oversight due to a century of government neglect. This means every favela is unique.
Wait, so there's no government regulation, what, on like the types of buildings or anything like that, or how it's built or what's done? That's like that's complete self-governance. Do they take and get water and stuff like that, or any kind of sewage systems and stuff there? Because that's the fact that all of them, the residents of the favelas in Brazil itself, produce equivalent GDP of an entire country. It's a lot of people.
So let's dig deeper and take a look at the 4 elements that actually typify all favelas. Number 1. Favelas were formed because there was simply no place for migrants and descendants of enslaved Africans to live. Without access to the formal housing market, their only option was to build their homes on vacant land. 127 years after abolition, favelas remain the primary affordable housing option. Number 2. Favelas have been historically unregulated by the government. Rio's favelas have been developed by residents for over a century because neglect has remained constant, perpetuating issues with sanitation, safety, and inadequate access to the city's resources.
How as a government, do you not make sure your citizens have the necessary stuff? Number one, thrive or are safe where they live. Like, I don't, and I'm not talking about whether it be, because there's cities here where you're not exactly safe. You might have a roof over your head and stuff like that, but that doesn't mean once you walk out the doors, or even if you're inside the doors, that you're necessarily safe, and it's due to the conditions that are around you. But to a century's worth, bro, that's flabbergasting. Like, that's, holy shit, that's mind-blowing. Is it they just don't care that the citizens are building their own houses, whether or not they have any kind of knowledge on how to build the house, or, did they not even try to provide, at least a water supply, or, a sewage system or something like that? I mean, which I know every country and every place is going to be different. But whenever you looked at developed places here in the Western Hemisphere, Brazil, all the pictures that you see, absolutely gorgeous. Large cities with modern buildings, and I don't know, how do you in the process of modernizing, how do you leave out a whole section of your population? How does that happen? How?
Number 3. Favelas are built by their residents, brick by brick. Most favelas have housed families for generations, producing a rich history in each home. Residents invest heavily in their homes, using the same building materials as the more conventional apartment blocks below. Number 4. Rio's favelas possess urbanistic qualities that are often ignored by both the media and the city itself, such as low-cost, centrally located housing, pedestrian-oriented street life, tight-knit communities, and unrestrained entrepreneurial and cultural activity.
I mean, which
We also asked
and I did take and I was, it still just blows my mind that, but the fact that number one, the communal aspect, even in like urban areas and stuff like that, the communal aspect of neighborhoods oftentimes, especially in modern times, at least I know here in the U.S. and in some other countries, is getting kind of lost, especially if you live close to a city center and stuff like that, or even around the outskirts, because everybody's taken and there's a lot of that gets lost. So the community aspect and the fact they are looking out for each other, I mean, it's pretty damn good, to be honest with you.
favela residents to describe their communities in a few words. Here's what they had to say.
Significa minha casa. Bom, cultura, lazer,
Morro, pago funk,
escola,
abandono,
amor,
carisma,
educação,
barraco, liberdade,
esquecimento,
tiro,
talentos,
reunião,
resistência,
jogo de poderes,
solidariedade,
arte, família.
So the fact that the favela started, that they popped up as a result of soldiers being promised land in Rio de Janeiro, and then the government, as a lot of governments are wont to do, not following through with that promise, and taking matters themselves, squatting and then just building on a hill, and the fact that tradition has carried on, to the fact that a full fifth of the citizens of Brazil live in favelas, and the government still, from the first day to now, there's nothing that to me, the fact that at some point in time the government didn't say, all right, look, we screwed up, right here, well, at least give it these resources here to make sure maybe you've got sanitation services or something of that nature. You know what I'm saying? Like, but the fact that that's how it started, and the fact that citizens still are building these, their own homes in these places, and there at the end, what people say, and it's all one word stuff. The vibrancy that seems to flow out of what most people said, you still also had in there abandonment, gunshot, and stuff that you just is going to happen whenever you don't have any governmental. Sometimes it'll happen regardless, but especially if it's just completely left alone, it's just, this was cool because the history, but also a further explanation of things, and we're gonna look at more. I'm fascinated. I'm absolutely fascinated. I want to know more about the history of Brazil. It's in my hemisphere, and I've not learned anything about it, to be honest with you, other than brief overviews at school. I hope y'all enjoyed this. Y'all be good to each other. Love yourselves. Peace.